In this video, I want to talk about the attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea. There's been a lot of speculation about who was behind it, and the thing is, there is no evidence for anything, at least not yet, so we don't know who did it. But I do think that we can say some things about the operational design of the attack and the choices that were made, and this says something about what the purpose must have been, and if we have an idea about the purpose of the attack, then we also have a good indication of who did it. And I'll save you the suspense. I think Russia did it. So what I want to do is to explain why. And it's going to be a little geeky because I'm going to use military theory to make the argument. And then I will also share some thoughts about the possible meaning of the attack, because I think many people in the West have a wrong perception about how serious this crisis is and how bad it can get. I don't know how the Nord Stream pipelines blew up, and maybe we'll never know, but I do think the operational design is interesting because when you plan such an act of sabotage, you make some important choices. And these choices reveal a lot about what you want to achieve. So I'm going to start with a bit of theory about hybrid warfare. This is Kilcullen's model, and he calls it liminal warfare instead of hybrid warfare, but it's basically the same thing. I made a whole video about Kilcullen's model if you want to go deeper into it, but the idea is that there are these three thresholds, and between the thresholds there is a space where actors can maneuver. So when you plan your operation, you make choices about which thresholds you want to be above or below. And when we look at the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines, then we are clearly above the detection threshold. Like, this is not some secret thing that's going on in society that nobody has noticed. Like, everybody can see this. And also everybody agrees that this is sabotage. But it's also below the attribution threshold. Like, there is no smoking gun kind of evidence here. So that is why we get all these different stories and arguments about who did it, and even smart people can disagree. Like, this is not a coincidence. Somebody made a deliberate choice that they wanted their operation to be here between the detection threshold and the attribution threshold. And this is what Kilcullen calls the space for covert operations. So when we look at the bombings of Nord Stream 1 and 2, then we have to ask ourselves for whom it would make sense to make this operational choice. In other words, we need to look beyond the immediate question of who can benefit from the Nord Stream pipelines being sabotaged and more consider why the operational choices were made to destroy the pipelines in this way and not in some other way. So if we look at the consequences of this operational choice, I think it has created three immediate effects. Like, first, it has created more uncertainty on the European energy market. It happened on the same day that another pipeline, the Baltic pipe, was opened. It delivers gas from Norway to Poland, and it runs through the same area as Nord Stream. So, of course, everyone is now concerned that Baltic pipe is also vulnerable to sabotage. This would not have happened if the operation had been below the detection threshold. Another thing is that it creates fear in general in the countries that are involved. These are some very significant explosions, and they happened very close to Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and Poland. So it raises sort of a general sense of insecurity in the populations around the Baltic Sea. Again, this also would not have happened if the attack had been below the detection threshold. And then third, it has created ruptures in the Western alliance. Like, for example, a surprising number of Germans now seem to believe that the United States conducted an armed attack against the German economy. This can lead more people to joining protests and demonstrations against German participation in America's war in Ukraine, or how they want to frame it. So this is undermining the cohesion in the Western alliance that supports Ukraine. And that is happening because the Nord Stream sabotage is below the attribution threshold. So the operational design of this military action created these three effects. if you wanted different effects, then you would have made different operational choices. And this is where I think we can begin to exclude some of the theories that people have about who can be behind this. Like, one of the popular ideas is that the Americans did it so that Germany will stop dreaming about Russian gas because the pipelines don't work anymore. Like, I can see why some people might find this story convincing, because obviously the Americans don't want Germany to give in to Russia, but the operational design doesn't fit the purpose. Like, pretty much all of the effects that I mentioned before are bad for the United States. So if the Americans really wanted to do this, I am pretty sure that they would have designed the operation to work below the detection threshold. That could have achieved their desired goal without all the negative consequences. So that could have been something like a cyber attack, or it could have been some kind of much less spectacular kind of sabotage, perhaps in the St. Petersburg end of the pipeline rather than close to Germany. Like, there are many ways that one can do that, but the point is that this could have been done in ways that would attract much less attention. Like, I don't think the Americans would take such a risk in order to shut down a pipeline that is already closed, but an operation below the detection threshold would have supported the story that the Americans are behind this. And I think we can go through pretty much any other state actor and say the same thing, like Poland or Ukraine, for example. And my answer to all of those suggestions is that the operational design doesn't support the hypothesis, because all of these actors would have chosen to stay below the detection threshold to avoid all the negative consequences that can undermine the Western alliance in Ukraine. Then I've also seen some speculation that it could be non-governmental organizations like climate activists. I don't think they have the technical capability to do it, but if they did, I think they would want everyone to know about it. Like, these activists have a cause, so obviously they would want people to understand what the cause is and to take some kind of action. So they would have chosen an operational design that would place it in the top, above the response threshold. And this basically means that the only actor that I can see where this operational design makes sense is Russia. Like, the consequences that I listed before of this taking place above the detection threshold and below the attribution threshold, they are all good for Russia. So that is why, from an operational point of view, I think Russia is the most obvious suspect. I think it's possible that over the coming weeks there will come some kind of evidence that pushes the operation above the attribution threshold, but that's not actually going to remove the ambiguity, because even if everything points to Russia, there is still going to be a big group of people who will continue to pull out that Joe Biden quote and say that the Americans did it, because that story is already planted in the minds of many people. Okay, so that was the operational design. Then I also want to talk a bit about risk-taking, because when you make such a spectacular hybrid attack, then there is also a risk. Like, things can go wrong or they can backfire. So again, I think we can look at the different suspects and discuss who would be more inclined to taking such a risk. And there is also some theory that we can use here. There is something called prospect theory that is often used to predict who will be most willing to take risks and who will be more risk averse. It's actually a piece of theory from economics, but it's often used in security studies as well. And the point is that people like to win, but we really, 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 really hate to lose. Like, we are much more passionate about losing than we are about winning. So when we take a risk, it's generally about one of two things. Like, either we can take a risk because we have a chance of winning something, or we can take a risk because we want to avoid losing. And prospect theory says that if we are winning, then we will be careful about taking risks. But if we are losing, then we will take big risks in order to sort of try to turn things around. And my point here is that Russia is in the middle of a war that they are losing. Like, this is an extremely painful experience for them. So Russia is likely to take big risks in the current situation. And On the other hand, the United States and Poland and Ukraine are all on the winning team at the moment. Like, things are going well for them. So they are unlikely to take a big risk by doing something dramatic that could potentially turn things around. My point here is that if we use prospect theory, then again, I think the most likely suspect behind the Nord Stream sabotage is Russia. Okay, so I have used two different approaches here, and I think both of them point to Russia. But why would they blow up their own pipeline? This is a question that I think people on the internet put way too much emphasis on. Yes, it does not make financial sense to blow up your own source of income, but Russia is at war, and Russia is losing a war. I actually think many people in the West don't realize how deep this crisis is for Russia, and it's actually quite confusing because at the one moment we are discussing whether Russia might be on the verge of using nuclear weapons, and then the next moment somebody will say that blowing up a pipeline is sort of incompatible with Russia's long-term economic priorities, like as if normal peacetime logic still applies. Look, there is a war going on. The mobilization is devastating for Russia's economy, and this is a country that is heading for collapse. Like, there is only one priority in Russian politics right now, and that is crisis management. There is no long-term at the moment. So nobody in the Russian government gives a damn about the cost of repairing these pipelines. And that's why we need to be prepared that this can get a lot worse. It looks like Russia has decided that the economic crisis that they could create in Europe by cutting the gas was not big enough. Like, I made a video about why this strategy was unlikely to work, and my sense is that Moscow has also realized that it won't work and that they're getting frustrated about it. Like, the Europeans have shown no sign of waning support for Ukraine, and instead they are finding alternatives to Russian gas. So it seems that the Russians have decided that they need to make the crisis worse. So I think we need to be prepared that they might also target more significant things than their own pipelines. Like, basically that they could change their strategy so that they aren't anymore hoping that Europe will stop supporting Ukraine in order to get the Russian gas again, but rather that Europe can maybe be coerced into not supporting Ukraine if that is the only way to stop a wave of sabotage on critical infrastructure. Would Russia be willing to take that risk? Absolutely. And also, if it could lead to some reaction from NATO, they are losing a war. They are willing to take extremely high risks in the hope of turning this around. And if the only alternative on Putin's desk is nuclear weapons, then I guess a bit of sabotage on critical infrastructure in Europe is not a bad option. Like, it sounds like something that you might want to try. So I think we need to be ready for this, and I think we need to get beyond the idea that Russia is a normal country in a normal state of mind, because Russia is a country at war, and that has changed the rules of the game. Okay, on that depressing note, I'm going to end it here. If you found the video useful, please give it a like. And also don't forget that you can subscribe. And if you click the little bell icon, you will also get a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.